They want state security completely dissolved. Is that realistic at this moment in time?
I think it's possible because, frankly, state security has drifted in the past decades from its core function. It had no longer become about state security. It had become a repressive apparatus to single out opponents of the regime, to fix elections. So it's not as if it was serving a legitimate function within the scope of the Ministry of Interior's responsibilities. And so, you know, something will obviously have to fill the void, but there have not been any reasonable plans put forward. It's not a possible solution to simply put the old Ministry of Interior forces back on the street. There has to be something concrete to make sure that those who were past offenders, who have been abusing and repressing Egyptians in years past, are dealt with. And so I think that has to be something that the new cabinet deals with quite efficiently.
You talk about this fundamental lack of trust between those who feel that their revolution might be hijacked and those who are currently in power. Why is it that there doesn't seem to be the credibility amongst the leadership, from among the new Prime Minister, Mr. Sharaf, and of course his new appointments like Mr. Al-Arabi?
Well, I would say someone like Nabil Al-Arabi is a respected figure, and I think is a huge improvement in the minds of the opposition figures over someone like Abul Ghait. So this is seen as a concrete and positive step, as is the appointment of the new Prime Minister Sharaf. The removal of Ahmed Shafi as Prime Minister has been a consistent demand of the opposition forces. But beyond the personalities involved, I think the opposition has in mind refashioning the regime, having a new social compact between the government and the people. And so this is far beyond simply who is in charge and who is making decisions, but actual steps. So I think, yes, we've seen positive steps taken with respect to refashioning the cabinet, but more importantly, what will they do? How will they try to regain the trust of Egypt's citizens?
Michael Wahid Hanna, thank you very much for joining us live from New York. Very good to hear your thoughts. Now, U.S. Senator John Kerry says plans should be made for a no-fly zone in Libya if the violence gets worse. Much of the international community is still divided on the issue. Kristen Salumi looks at why no-fly zones are controversial.
Please, United Nations, save Libya.
The impassioned pleas of the Libyan delegation to the United Nations inspired the international community to enact sanctions against Libya's Muammar Gaddafi and sparked what has become an international debate over one possible next step, a no-fly zone.
Something has to be done concerning the declaring a non-fly zone on all the cities of Libya.
The last time the UN Security Council authorized a no-fly zone was in 1992 over Bosnia during that country's civil war. It took a year to get all members of the council on board.
Do you think the Security Council will get around to imposing a no-fly zone?
I think it's very likely if the conflict doesn't end soon, if the humanitarian situation gets worse.
Mohammed Sakrbi was Bosnia's UN ambassador at the time.
Yes, Bosnia is Europe, Libya is North Africa, but it seems that overwhelmingly there is a similar desire to see the UN Security Council be more assertive in bringing the conflict to an end, as well as helping the civilian population.
But it's the no-fly zone imposed on Iraq in the 90s and kept in place for more than a decade that gives some Security Council diplomats pause. Enacted primarily by the U.S. and the United Kingdom, without international backing, it is now associated with the controversial U.S.-led invasion of Iraq. Some diplomats, including veto-wielding members China and Russia, have expressed reservations about taking action that could be seen as promoting regime change and that could set the stage for long-term military commitments. But Sakrbi believes the Security Council has already crossed that line.
There is not only a cost to intervention, there is a cost to non-intervention. There is a cost to not applying the no-fly zone. And that cost is that you may have to do more in the end. you may be facing a much more complex situation, and you may have to use significantly greater force to bring about the desired result.
At this stage, the Security Council has shown no inclination for further action on Libya. But the calls for a no-fly zone are likely to continue as long as Muammar Gaddafi remains in power. And the more Libyans who die, the harder it will be for those calls to be ignored. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, the United Nations.
Let's take a look at other news now. Truck drivers in Gaza are on an indefinite strike. They're protesting against Israel's permanent closure of the commercial Karni crossing in the north of the Strip. This leaves the Karam Abu Salim crossing in the south as the only way for goods to get in and out of Gaza. Nicole Johnston has more from Rafah.
Here at Rafah, hundreds of Gaza's truck drivers are on strike. They've blocked the entrance to the Karam Abu Salim crossing, and that means at the moment no supplies can get in and out of Gaza. Now they're striking because Israel has closed the Karni crossing, and the drivers are saying that they won't work until it reopens. Now, Karni used to be the main export and import point for Gaza, but when Hamas took over, Israel closed it, except for gravel and grain, and now Israel has shut it down completely.
Karni is a well-prepared crossing for security and infrastructure. It's cheaper. It's closer to the city, to the factories, to the warehouses, and to the wholesalers. In addition, from the Israeli seaport to the crossing, it's only 35 to 40 kilometres. But Karam Abu Salim is 3 times further than Karni, and its capacity is very limited. It's also more expensive.
Now, Israel says that it's closed the Karni crossing for security reasons and that it's expanding the capacity of the Karam Abu Salim crossing. But for people in Gaza, that's not enough, and businessmen and drivers here, they don't believe Israel. They say that they had a perfectly good crossing in the first place that never should have been closed, and that this is in fact another attempt by Israel to tighten the siege. Nicole Johnston, Al Jazeera, Rafah.
Afghan President Hamid Karzai has rejected a U.S. apology for the mistaken killing of 9 Afghan boys in a NATO airstrike last week. It comes as hundreds of protesters took to the streets of Kabul on Sunday to demonstrate against U.S. military operations in the country. A statement from Karzai's office said the president had told General David Petraeus, the top commander of coalition forces in Afghanistan, that civilian deaths in his country are no longer acceptable and that expressing regret was not sufficient. Japan's foreign minister has resigned after accepting a political donation from a foreign national, which is illegal in Japan. On Friday, Saiji Maihara admitted he received money from a Korean resident in Japan. His departure is a blow for Japan's embattled Prime Minister Naoto Kan. India's Prime Minister is under pressure. The leader of India's main opposition party, the BJP, has hit out at Manmohan Singh, accusing him of indecisiveness and an inability to tackle corruption. It follows a string of recent corruption scandals involving top officials and ministers.
They are not able to take any clear-cut decision on any important issue. That is very clear. And the Prime Minister himself expressed helplessness. You have seen the Prime Minister's press conference.